The AP1000, which is the reactor that's proposed for Cumbria, is I argued in front of the Nuclear Regulatory Commission back in 2010 that it had two design flaws, and then another scientist, Dr. Susan Sterrett, argued it had another design flaw, and another NRC employee, Dr. Ma, argued it had another design flaw. And we were all bowled over by the nuclear steamroller. I argued in 2010 that the containment could leak. And the AP1000 is special because in theory it has a very unique containment. So I argued in front of what's called the ACRS, the Advisory Committee on Reactor Safeguards, and I had 66 examples of nuclear containments worldwide that sprung leaks. And the Nuclear Regulatory Commission got up and they said, no, containments don't leak. And the Advisory Committee on Reactor Safeguards believed the assumption of the NRC staff compared to the real data, that there were 66 containment leaks that I could count on. There might even be more because they weren't tracking them very well. So the AP1000 was licensed, and then came Fukushima Daiichi. And guess what? The containment's leaked. The explosions that Ian showed are clear indications that the containment's leaked. So we have the Nuclear Regulatory Commission allowing the AP1000 to be licensed based on the assumption that containments don't leak. And we had 66 examples of containment failures before it. And then we had 3 colossal examples of containment failures after it. And yet we continue to build AP1000s. Engineers always design for the previous failure. And here's an example. Who's ever heard of the Titanic? Raise your hands, right? Okay, we all know what happened. Well, engineers designed to prevent the Titanic from happening. And they required more lifeboats on top. Who's ever heard of the Eastland? No, right? The Eastland capsized at the pier in Chicago because it had too many lifeboats on top. And it killed more people at the pier in Chicago 9 years after the Titanic than the Titanic did in the North Atlantic. So new doesn't mean better. And so the AP1000 has new features, and in fact new means untested. Right? So we have to wait for something to break to say, oh my gosh, let's design the next reactor to be a little better than that. The Nuclear Regulatory Commission and worldwide, the IAEA uses this thing called probabilistic risk assessment, PRA. I call it PRAY. They call it probabilistic risk assessment. And and they'll say that the AP1000 is much safer than the previous generation plants. And I actually have known engineers who've quit the industry because they were involved in this, and they were pushing the numbers. They were pencil whipping the calculation, is what we call it. You know, they were trying to get better numbers by distorting the raw data. And it happens routinely in the nuclear industry. If you want to keep a plant running, you discard the bad data and you go with the good data to show that it has a very low probability of an accident. But yet we know we've had 5 meltdowns in 35 years. The AP1000 is really unique, and I'm going to use a cup. The AP1000 has a containment that's steel, and they call AP stands for Advanced Passive. There's no electricity inside the containment after an accident, and it's designed so that hot water rises, and when it cools, it sinks, and just natural convection is designed to cool the nuclear reactor that's inside that containment for the better part of 3 days. So it can run 3 days without electricity, in theory, but nobody's tested this thing out. It's too expensive to build a nuclear plant and then blow it to pieces. The plant is entirely designed using supercomputers. There's no other analysis. So what happens now, here we have the AP1000 containment. Inside there's a nuclear reactor where my finger is. And outside of it is another building. On top of that other building is 8 million pounds of water. So by tons, what's that,
4,000.
4,000 tons of water is on the roof of the building. And from seismic standpoint, of course, that's dangerous. It's called it's like an upside down pendulum. It's called an amplified response spectrum. The top is too heavy. So it's a difficult engineering problem to begin with. And after an accident, valves are supposed to open that so far they're having problems with, that sprinkle like a rain down on the containment for 3 days and take the heat out of the containment and produce a cloud of steam that comes out of the top of this surrounding building. So that's how this thing gets cooled. The 8 million pounds of water on the top drizzles onto the containment, evaporates off because of the nuclear heat inside, and steam comes out, sort of like Vesuvius. And if that's how it's worked, it's fine. But what I told the Nuclear Regulatory Commission is that, what if that containment has a leak? And they said, well, containments don't leak. I said 66 did. So if that containment has the slightest leak, about the size of the first joint of my pinky, it's enough to cause mass evacuations out to 50 miles. Because the leak will push the radiation out, and then the cooling gases will lift that radiation right out and blow it around the countryside. It's called the chimney effect, is the name that Fairewinds came up with to explain what this accident is. We had an accident in the States at a place called WIP. And WIP is in near Carlsbad, New Mexico. It's in a salt mine. And WIP stands for Waste Isolation Pilot Project. Emphasize pilot. And what happened was that plutonium waste, not nuclear fuel, but waste that had plutonium in it, was shipped to WIP, and it was wet. So to suck up the moisture, they threw in kitty litter. This is true. You can't make this stuff up. Kitty litter and nuclear power in the same lecture. And the kitty litter had a chemical reaction that exploded the containers underground. It happened on the night of Valentine's Day 2 years ago, and there was nobody in the mine. Thank God. And people, a couple dozen employees on the surface were still contaminated. But had there been people in the mine, would have been severe contamination. Likely, the WIP will not get recommissioned, perhaps for another 5 more years, because the contamination underground is so extensive. Now that was a pilot project, but that explosion, engineers calculated, was going to be a once in a 20,000 year event. And it happened in 10 years. It sounds a lot like the probability of a nuclear meltdown. No, the same. Last thing is, this is a technology that can destroy the fabric of society. Gorbachev in his memoirs said that it wasn't perestroika that destroyed the Soviet Union. It was Chernobyl. Read his memoirs, it's in there. And then I've gotten to know Naoto Kan, who's so Gorbachev, of course, he's a communist ruler. And then Naoto Kan was the prime minister of Japan during the accident. And he's what we would call a liberal. And he said basically Japan should not start up its nuclear power plants. And then 4 other previous prime ministers in Japan who are conservative have also said the same thing. So we have 5 Japanese prime ministers who think we should never build another nuclear power plant and not start up the nuclear power plants we have in Japan. We have Mikhail Gorbachev on the other extreme. And then we've got Angela Merkel, who's, she was a physicist and a very pro-nuclear prime minister, premier prime minister? Chancellor, there we go. A very conservative chancellor before the accident. And now she's over in Japan telling the Japanese, go our way, wean yourself from these things. So there is a future. Another one-liner for you on this nuclear waste thing, by the way, is that if you believe in nuclear power, the advocates of nuclear power will say that they are so smart that they can store nuclear waste for 250,000 years. And the rest of us are so dumb we don't know how to store electricity overnight. And that's really what it boils down to. What the storage technology to get to a distributed grid is available, and the price is plummeting. I think 100 years from now, we'll see, looking back, it's not going to be about pro-nukes and anti-nukes. It's not going to be about that. It's going to be about distributed power, a 21st century concept compared to central station power. When I started building power plants in the 70s, that's the only way you could build it. There weren't the computers. You know, like now we all have cell phones, but it used to be that wires went to a central station. Now, my thesis was done on an IBM 360. It was about big as this room, 2 stories high, $2 million, and it took minutes to run my thesis on the computer. My Apple's got more power than that IBM 360, and I don't have to go to it. It's in my hands. So computing has changed the paradigm in communications, and in basically it's given us the internet's now at our fingers. And the last domino to fall is electricity. So the battle that we're in is not about pro-nuke and anti-nuke. The AP1000 is a player in that. But if the UK goes with the AP1000, you're trapping yourself into an asset with a 60-year life that's extraordinarily expensive. Solar is not a fuel. Solar is a technology. And the technology price is plummeting. Nuclear and gas and coal and oil are fuels, and their prices are rising. And they've already crossed over. For solar, solar is now cheaper. So is wind, cheaper than nuclear. And there was recently an auction right here in the UK that had wind outbidding nuclear. So wind is already cheaper in the UK than nuclear. Storage prices, there's a guy named Elon Musk. He's the guy who is behind SpaceX and is behind the Tesla automobile. And he's developing a battery plant. And they believe that the storage technology within about 5 years will make solar plus storage cheaper than nuclear. So here we are with a fixed asset like Cumbria or like Hinkley that is going to come online in 2030, maybe. Now we're going to be stuck with a huge expense to depreciate over 60 years, when by the time that plant is built, the technology, the available technologies will be much cheaper. So I think looking back, historians are going to say that nuclear is a player in this, but the real issue is distributed power.
It's an ongoing disaster, basically. The accident or the disaster is not finished. The massive amounts of water are being stored on site because the water is coming in from the hillside and going through, percolating through the disaster zone, and they're catching it and putting it in these tanks. There's about 10,000 tanks at the site. And they're just storing it because they don't know what else to do with it. And these are highly concentrated levels of cesium and strontium, basically. This is it from the back. You can see the whole plant here. This is a relatively early. All that green area now is taken up by tanks, temporary. They call it temporary tanks. They've been there for decades. Every day there are 300 tons of water leaking out to the sea, which are varying concentrations, but mostly fairly high concentrations. 300 tons is a lot every day. And this shows you the ground flow from the back going towards the Pacific Ocean, and is percolating through the reactor buildings, or what's left of them, and flowing out to sea and contaminating the sea. And this is going to go on. How long? I would not like to put a limit on it. Decades, perhaps, this will go on. The German government, in 2005, were fed up with its citizens complaining about, or showing anecdotal evidence of increased leukemias near their power stations. So the German government said, right, we're going to show you guys that there's nothing to worry about. We're going to do a big, massive study, and we are going to show you for once and for all that you morning minis are all wrong. So they commissioned a world-famous epidemiologist, Maria Brettner, at the University of Mainz. He is a powerful person, I'll tell you, one of the best epidemiologists there are. And they gave unlimited funds and said to a team of 6 top-notch, crack team of top-notch epidemiologists, go away and study this, and look at all the nuclear power stations in Germany, and come back and tell us and show us what the results are. we'll show these morning minis then. Except they did this study, and gee whiz, it was exactly the opposite. The increases were much greater than they had anticipated. They had anticipated no increases at all, and they found a doubling of the childhood leukemia rates near all nuclear power stations. This is called a KIK study, if anybody wants to know. KIKK, which stands for Kinderkrebs and Kernkentral. God almighty, how to get it all out. There's so many K's, I get them all mixed up. Anyway, the team who were all, by the way, pro-nuclear, these epidemiologists were all pro-nuclear, were gobsmacked. And they called in the government and said, look, the government said, go check your figures. We've already checked them. We'll check them again. We've already checked them 4 times. I'm hearing this, by the way, from people on the inside. I put together a paper giving a hypothesis to explain why these childhood leukemias arose. And just very quickly, what happens is that pregnant women living near the reactors within 5 kilometers, breathe the fumes in, the radioactive emissions in, and it's deposited in the first 3 months of pregnancy on the growing embryo, and later on in the fetus. And it's the, what we call the erythropoietic cells, in other words, the blood-forming cells in the bone marrow, which are extremely radiosensitive. This is little eyebrows the size of my hand. And their bone-forming cells, their blood-forming cells in their tiny little bone marrow are uniquely sensitive to radiation. And they get zapped, and as a result of that, they form immature, bad blood cells, white blood cells. The leukocytes are deformed, and the baby dies from leukemia. That's what blood cancer is.
What does all this mean for Cumbria, right? And the politicians say, well, you've got nuclear arguments on the one hand, everything that's been rehearsed here about health and about safety and about whether it works. The killer argument is, what is it? It's jobs. We have to have jobs. And the West Cumbrian economy is indeed extremely dependent on the nuclear industry for its jobs. But does it need to be? And that is the question that we are asking. Those of you who've got this little postcard will see that there's a website. That's all it's doing, it's advertising a website. And it's called CumbrianEnergyRevolution.org.uk. And what it does is it shows that there are many different kinds of renewable energy, energy efficiency, insulation projects, combined heat and power, district heating systems that could be implemented here. Not only does it show what the building blocks would be for a strategy that doesn't rely on nuclear, but it also shows specifically some of the stuff that Cumbria is really good at. So, what you tend to think of when you talk about renewables is solar and wind. Well, solar, we do have some sun. We had a nice sunny day the other day. Wind, we have a lot of wind. but some people are not too keen on wind turbines. I don't quite understand why. I think they're great, but I wouldn't want to see them everywhere, so, you know, I can get that side of the argument. But, you know, two of the things we really have a lot of is water and wood. And we also have we have a farming industry which, you know, which produces waste material that can be used for anaerobic digestion. So there are all kinds of resources that are available here in Cumbria to develop a renewable energy strategy. What we need is the political will to develop that.
To finish, there's something I want to say in response to Ruth's excellent presentation, and that is jobs. That's really, really, really important throughout the whole of Britain, but especially in Cumbria. Now, the thing is that renewable energy provides a cornucopia of jobs. I want people to, I think most people here will have heard of the energy Wende being pursued in Germany. It was the biggest economy by far in Europe, almost as big as Britain and France put together, is now pursuing an energy revolution, basically. And I want you to think how many jobs you think are created, have been created, or are now existing in Germany, I should say, in the renewable energy industries. Oh, to give you a clue, the population of Germany is about 80 million, and Britain is about 60 million. Okay? So how many jobs do you think there are in the renewable energy industries in Germany? Okay, I'll tell you. There are 440,000 jobs, according to the Germans. That figure is actually about a year and a quarter old. In this country, there are, roughly speaking, about maybe 18,000 jobs involved in nuclear power, and about another 5,000 or 6,000 involved in renewable energy. It goes up and down because there's a lot of construction, but that's temporary. The big job creation is in those countries which manufacture the wind turbines and the wave power machines or the solar panels, etc., etc. Not much of that goes on in Britain, unfortunately. So what's happening is in Germany, they've got, as I say, 440,000 direct jobs. There's a multiplier effect for the jobs that are created in the communities, and as we see here, it's Cumbria with nuclear, and it's more like 1 million jobs altogether. And my question is, I always say this to them, wouldn't it be nice to have 1 million jobs here in Britain? And maybe that's what we should be trying to put forward to those people who insisted that we must have nuclear. The job creation potential for renewable energy is much larger. Let's go that way.